In this episode, we are moving into a part of vulnerability analysis that helps security work make sense to the business instead of sounding like a long list of technical problems with no clear order. Asset value and business impact are the ideas that help an analyst explain why one weakness should be addressed before another, even when both appear serious on a scan report. A vulnerability on a system is never just about the weakness itself, because the real question is what that system is worth to the organization and what happens if it fails, is abused, or becomes unavailable at the wrong time. For a brand new learner, the easiest way to frame the topic is this. Security teams do not protect machines only because machines exist. They protect the business functions, data, services, trust, and operations those machines support, and asset value is what helps connect the technical world to that larger reality. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. When people first hear the phrase asset value, they often think in narrow financial terms, as if the value of a system is mainly the cost to buy the hardware or license the software. That way of thinking is too limited for useful security work, because an inexpensive server can support a very high-value business process, while an expensive piece of equipment might matter far less if it supports a minor internal task. Asset value in cybersecurity is really about importance, dependency, and consequence. A system may be valuable because it stores sensitive data, because it enables revenue-generating activity, because it supports identity and access across the company, or because its downtime would stop other teams from doing their jobs. This means analysts need to think beyond purchase price and ask what the asset actually does for the organization. Once you start thinking that way, you realize that the business meaning of a system often matters far more than its technical label or replacement cost. Business impact is closely related, but it answers a different question. Asset value asks why the system matters in general, while business impact asks what happens to the organization if that system is compromised, altered, misused, or taken offline. This distinction is helpful because a valuable asset may create several different kinds of impact depending on how the attack unfolds. If a customer portal fails, the business may lose revenue and trust. If an identity service is compromised, attackers may gain access to many other systems and create a much wider incident. If a medical, industrial, or safety-related platform becomes unreliable, the impact may extend beyond data loss into physical harm, service interruption, or regulatory exposure. Good analysts, therefore, do not stop after deciding that an asset is important. They also think through the kinds of damage the organization would actually experience if security failed around that asset, because that is what gives urgency and meaning to the analysis. A major reason this topic matters so much is that vulnerability management is really a prioritization problem. Most organizations have more findings than they can fix immediately, which means they need a defensible way to decide what gets attention first. If analysts focus only on technical severity, they can miss the fact that a moderate weakness on a critical business system may deserve faster action than a high-severity issue on a low-value test server. Asset value and business impact help correct that problem by grounding decisions in the environment the organization is actually trying to protect. This is where security becomes much more than tool output. The scanner may tell you what appears wrong, but the business context tells you what matters most. For a beginner, that is one of the most important professional lessons to learn early, because effective security is rarely about fixing everything at once. It is about reducing the most meaningful risk first. One of the clearest examples of asset value is sensitive data. A system that stores customer records, employee data, payment information, health information, legal documents, trade secrets, or privileged credentials often carries high value because compromise would affect far more than one device. It could create legal exposure, regulatory penalties, customer harm, fraud, reputational damage, and long-term trust problems that are expensive to repair. In many cases, the organization may be able to replace the underlying hardware quickly, but replacing trust or reversing public disclosure is much harder. That is why analysts pay such close attention to where important data lives. how it is processed, and which systems can reach it. A system does not need to look glamorous to be crucial. A quiet database, a backup service, or a file repository may deserve far more protection than a flashy public application if it holds the information that keeps the business functioning and keeps the organization compliant with its obligations. Operational dependency is another major part of asset value, and it often becomes visible only when something breaks. Some systems are important not because people interact with them directly, but because many other services quietly depend on them to function. Identity systems are a good example, because if authentication fails, employees may not be able to log in, administrators may not be able to manage systems, and applications across the organization may stop working correctly. The same idea applies to core databases, network infrastructure, payment processors, scheduling platforms, and supporting services that enable a larger chain of activity. When analysts think about business impact, they have to consider not just the direct role of an asset, but the domino effect that can follow if it goes down or is compromised. A system with many dependencies often deserves higher attention because failure there can spread quickly across departments, services, or customer-facing operations. That makes the asset more important even if the system itself is not especially visible to ordinary users. Revenue connection also shapes business impact in powerful ways. Some assets are tied directly to how the organization earns money, serves customers, or fulfills its mission. A weakness on an internal test machine might be inconvenient, but a weakness on an e-commerce platform, a reservation system, a billing service, or a core application used by paying clients may carry much greater urgency because any disruption affects income and customer confidence at the same time. Even short outages can become expensive when a high-value service is central to business operations. Analysts therefore need to ask whether the asset supports transactions, customer access, contractual obligations, or time-sensitive business commitments. This is not just a management concern. It directly affects how vulnerability findings should be prioritized. A security team that ignores the economic role of a system may end up protecting the wrong things first, while a team that understands business dependency can align remediation with the actual pressure points that keep the organization healthy. Reputation and trust are also part of business impact, even though they can be harder to measure than direct financial loss. An organization can sometimes survive a short technical disruption more easily than it can survive public loss of confidence after a serious security event. If customers believe their data is unsafe, if partners start doubting the company's reliability, or if regulators question its controls, the consequences may continue long after the original technical problem is fixed. This is why certain assets deserve elevated attention even when the immediate operational effect of compromise is not obvious. A public-facing portal, a system holding executive communications, or a platform tied to brand identity may carry reputational weight that far exceeds its apparent technical role. Good analysts remember that security failures are often judged in public by their business effect, not by the technical details that caused them. That makes reputation a legitimate part of business impact analysis rather than a vague afterthought. Regulatory and legal exposure can also raise asset value significantly. Some systems matter more because the organization has formal obligations tied to the data they handle or the service they provide. If a platform processes payment data, health data, government records, or other protected information, then compromise may trigger reporting duties, penalties, audits, lawsuits, or contractual consequences that go far beyond the technical repair effort. A low-cost system can therefore create very high business risk if it sits in the middle of a regulated process. Analysts need to understand this because security decisions do not happen in a legal vacuum. The organization may have compliance expectations, customer commitments, and retention obligations that turn certain assets into high-priority security concerns regardless of how ordinary they appear from a technical perspective. This is another reason raw vulnerability severity is never enough by itself. The same weakness means something very different when the affected asset sits inside a legally sensitive part of the business. Availability deserves special attention because many organizations focus naturally on data theft while underestimating how damaging service interruption can be. Some assets are most valuable not because of the information they hold, but because the business cannot function normally without them. If manufacturing stops, if appointments cannot be scheduled, if support systems fail, if internal communications go down, or if cloud services supporting daily operations become unavailable, the business impact may begin immediately and spread faster than expected. In some sectors, availability problems can even create safety concerns or public service consequences, which raises the stakes further. Analysts therefore need to ask what happens if the asset becomes unavailable for an hour, a day, or longer. The answer often changes prioritization in a major way. A system that supports continuous operations may deserve urgent attention for vulnerabilities that threaten uptime, even if the same vulnerabilities would seem less critical on assets that can tolerate temporary downtime without serious disruption. The idea of business impact analysis, BIA, is useful here because it gives organizations a structured way to think about consequences before a crisis happens. A BIA helps identify which processes matter most, which systems support those processes, how quickly the organization needs them restored, and what kinds of loss occur when they are interrupted. For vulnerability analysts, that information is extremely valuable because it turns asset value into something more concrete and operational. Instead of guessing which systems are most important, the analyst can rely on a broader understanding of what the business has already identified as critical. That helps make remediation decisions more consistent and easier to explain. It also reminds beginners that security is strongest when it connects to business planning rather than operating separately from it. A vulnerability program that ignores business continuity thinking may still find weaknesses, but it will struggle to rank them wisely when real trade-offs appear. Asset value is also shaped by who uses the system and how widely it is trusted. A weakness on a platform used only by one small internal team may matter less than a weakness on a system used by executives, administrators, customers, or large parts of the workforce. The number of users is not the only factor, but broad use often increases consequence because more people are affected by failure and more pathways may depend on the asset's reliability. Trust relationships also matter greatly. If a system can reach many others, holds privileged credentials, or serves as a bridge between segments, its value rises because compromise there can open doors across the environment. Analysts should therefore think about not only the asset's direct function, but also its position in the organization's web of trust. A medium-severity flaw on a highly trusted system can create more real danger than a severe flaw on an isolated system with little access and limited business role. Another important point for beginners is that asset value can change over time. A system that was once low value may become more important after a merger, a new customer launch, a shift to remote work, or a decision to move more processes onto it. A platform that was once internal may later become customer-facing. A neglected server may suddenly become central because other systems now depend on it. This means analysts cannot rely forever on old assumptions about what matters most. Business impact has to be reviewed in light of changing operations, changing data flows, and changing business priorities. Security teams that fail to update their view of asset value often end up protecting yesterday's critical systems, while today's most important services accumulate unaddressed risk. Good analysts therefore stay alert to business change, because vulnerability prioritization depends on current reality rather than on old diagrams or outdated ownership labels. When analysts combine asset value with vulnerability severity, exploitability, and exposure, they produce much better decisions than any one of those factors could produce alone. A highly severe vulnerability on a low-value isolated lab machine may still need correction, but the urgency may be lower than a moderate issue on a heavily used customer platform with access to sensitive data. At the same time, a critical weakness on a high-value identity system may deserve immediate escalation because it combines technical danger with massive business consequence. This is where security work becomes both more difficult and more useful. The analyst is no longer just reading a report. The analyst is weighing technical evidence against business importance and deciding where limited time will reduce the most meaningful risk. That kind of judgment is one of the core skills of a mature defender because organizations rarely suffer from a lack of findings. They suffer from a lack of clear, business-aware prioritization. Communication becomes much stronger when asset value and business impact are part of the conversation. A system owner or executive may not react strongly to a statement that a service has a high-severity vulnerability, but they are much more likely to act when the analyst explains that the issue affects a customer-facing platform tied to revenue, that the system stores regulated data, or that downtime would disrupt critical operations across multiple teams. This is not manipulation. It is accurate translation of technical risk into business language. Security teams gain credibility when they can explain why a finding matters in terms the rest of the organization understands. They also make remediation more likely, because business leaders are responsible for protecting mission, service, revenue, trust, and compliance, not just for responding to technical terminology. Analysts who understand asset value can therefore do more than find problems. They can make the case for action in a way that aligns security with the priorities the organization already cares about. The most useful habit to carry forward is to stop asking only how bad the vulnerability is and start asking how much the affected asset matters if something goes wrong. That question changes the whole character of vulnerability analysis. It moves the conversation away from abstract severity and toward consequence, which is where real decision-making lives. Asset value and business impact do not replace technical analysis, but they give technical analysis a purpose. They help the team understand why a finding deserves immediate action, why another can wait for a maintenance cycle, and why some systems should almost never be allowed to sit with unresolved weakness for long. That is what makes this topic so important for CySA Plus learners. It teaches you to think like someone defending an organization, not just like someone reviewing scanner output. The big takeaway is that asset value and business impact are what connect vulnerability findings to the real priorities of the organization. Asset value helps explain why a system matters, whether because of sensitive data, operational dependency, revenue support, trust relationships, compliance obligations, or business-critical functionality. Business impact explains what the organization stands to lose if that asset is compromised, misused, or taken offline. When analysts understand both ideas clearly, they can prioritize vulnerabilities in a way that reflects actual risk instead of relying only on technical severity. That leads to better decisions, stronger communication, and a security program that protects what truly matters most. Once you understand this perspective, vulnerability analysis stops being a race to fix whatever looks scariest on paper and becomes a disciplined effort to reduce the kinds of harm the business can least afford to absorb.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.